20 most brutal 70s exploitation films that got banned. These weren't just controversial. These were films so graphic, so transgressive that governments worldwide banned them outright. Many remain illegal to own even today. Films that sparked police investigations, criminal prosecutions, and moral panics. Content so extreme that directors faced charges and, in some cases, had to prove their actors were still alive. The 1970s marked exploitation cinema's most lawless decade, with censorship boards overwhelmed and international distribution creating jurisdictional chaos. Filmmakers pushed boundaries further than ever before or since. What resulted was a brief window where almost anything could be shown on screen, and some took that freedom to its absolute extreme. Tonight we're counting down the 20 most notorious, starting with number 20. Number 20. The Last House on the Left, 1972. Wes Craven's directorial debut arrived in 1972 with a $90,000 budget and a vision that would permanently alter horror cinema. Originally titled Krug and Company, the film was marketed with a tagline that would become infamous. "It's only a movie." Audiences would need that reminder. The film depicted assault and violence with documentary-style realism that made viewers deeply uncomfortable. There was no stylization, no distance, no relief, just raw, unpolished brutality that felt disturbingly real. Craven filmed with handheld cameras and natural lighting, creating an almost newsreel quality that made the horror immediate and inescapable. British authorities took notice immediately. When the 1984 Video Recordings Act passed, The Last House on the Left was banned completely in the UK. Police raided video stores across the country, confiscating copies and prosecuting shop owners simply for stocking the film. The ban would last 24 years, not lifted until 2008, a full 36 years after the film's release. The film was also banned in Iceland and Ireland, while Germany and Australia demanded heavy cuts before allowing any release. Yet by today's standards, the content seems almost tame. What made it untouchable for decades wasn't extreme gore or explicit imagery, but Craven's raw, unpolished approach that stripped away any comfortable distance between viewer and violence. It was horror that felt real, and that made all the difference. Number 19. Last Tango in Paris, 1972. When a major studio film starring Marlon Brando becomes the subject of international obscenity trials, you know something went terribly wrong. Bernardo Bertolucci's Last Tango in Paris wasn't a grindhouse exploitation film, it was an art house drama from a respected director with A-list talent. Yet it became one of the most controversial films of the decade. The film's infamous scene was filmed without actress Maria Schneider's informed consent. Brando improvised during the take, and Schneider later stated publicly that she felt humiliated and violated by the experience. What was intended as artistic expression became something far darker, a real person's trauma captured on camera and sold as entertainment. The backlash was immediate and severe. Italian courts ordered all copies of the film destroyed. Bertolucci received a 2-month suspended sentence, and his civil rights were suspended for 5 years. The director, who had earned critical acclaim, was now facing criminal prosecution. The film was banned outright in Spain, South Korea, and Chile. Even countries that allowed release demanded significant cuts. Italy itself briefly banned the film despite it being an Italian production. Last Tango in Paris proved that major Hollywood films could be more controversial than underground exploitation cinema. The difference was that this time, the trauma inflicted on the actress was real, documented, and undeniable. Maria Schneider would spend years dealing with the psychological aftermath of that shoot. A stark reminder that sometimes the most disturbing content isn't what's fictional, it's what actually happened behind the scenes. Number 18. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. Originally titled Day of the Woman, Mir Zarki's 1978 film remains one of the most divisive entries in exploitation cinema. Zarki claimed the film was inspired by a real incident in 1974, when he helped an assault victim and he wanted to confront audiences with the brutal reality of violence and revenge. The film follows Jennifer Hills, a young writer who rents a remote cabin to work on her novel. What follows is an extended sequence of brutal assault that occupies nearly half the film's runtime. Then comes the shift. Jennifer doesn't report to authorities. She doesn't seek traditional justice. Instead, she methodically hunts down each of her attackers, turning everyday objects into instruments of retribution. Critics were appalled. Roger Ebert gave the film 0 stars and called it a vile bag of garbage in his scathing 1980 review. Gene Siskel declared it represented an all-time low for cinema. Their fury wasn't just about the content, it was about what they saw as exploitation masquerading as social commentary. Countries agreed. Ireland, Norway, Iceland, and West Germany banned the film immediately upon release. Other nations demanded heavy cuts before allowing any screening. The film remained banned or censored in most countries until the 1990s, and some jurisdictions still restrict it today. Yet the debate never ended. Some feminist critics have defended the film, arguing that it gives Jennifer full agency and refuses to let viewers off the hook with easy moral lessons. Others maintain it's pure exploitation, using trauma as entertainment regardless of its stated intentions. I Spit on Your Grave remains exactly what Zarki intended, a film impossible to watch comfortably, and even more impossible to forget. Number 17, The Devils, 1971. Ken Russell's film for Warner Brothers stands as proof that major Hollywood studios could produce content more shocking than any grindhouse operation. Based on Aldous Huxley's The Devils of Loudon, the film depicted mass hysteria, possession, and violence in a 17th-century French convent, with a level of graphic intensity that stunned censors worldwide. The film's most infamous sequence has never been officially released. Warner Brothers still suppresses this footage decades later, deeming it too controversial even by modern standards. The scene depicted religious figures in explicit situations that censors found blasphemous beyond anything previously filmed by a major studio. Oliver Reed and Vanessa Redgrave delivered powerful performances in material that pushed every boundary. Russell's direction was unflinching, presenting the historical events with visceral intensity that left audiences and authorities equally disturbed. The film wasn't exploitation, it was a serious historical drama. Yet its content proved more extreme than most exploitation films of the era. Ireland banned the film outright and has never allowed an uncut theatrical release. Other countries demanded heavy censorship before permitting any screenings. Even in markets where it was allowed, The Devils faced constant battles with ratings boards and local authorities. The film remains one of the most censored major studio releases in history. Its combination of respected source material, A-list talent, and genuinely transgressive content created a unique controversy. The Devils proved that the line between art and exploitation wasn't determined by budget or prestige, it was determined by what appeared on screen. Number 16, The Toolbox Murders, 1978. Dennis Donnelly's film starring Cameron Mitchell earned its notoriety through sheer relentless intensity. The opening 40 minutes consist almost entirely of home invasion violence with minimal plot development. Where other slasher films built suspense or developed characters, The Toolbox Murders simply unleashed an uninterrupted assault. Power tools became weapons in sequences filmed with uncomfortable detail. The marketing emphasized realistic violence over theatrical presentation, promising audiences something closer to documentary footage than traditional horror. This approach made the film feel more transgressive than its actual content might suggest. The film's reputation grew beyond its reality. By the time the UK's video nasty panic erupted in 1984, The Toolbox Murders had become synonymous with extreme violence, despite being less graphic than many films that escaped censorship. British authorities banned it immediately, and the prohibition lasted 15 years until 1999. Multiple countries demanded censorship before allowing release. The film's title alone seemed to promise depravity, and authorities responded accordingly. Video store owners reported that the cover art and reputation drove both curiosity and condemnation in equal measure. The Toolbox Murders became more infamous than its content warranted, a testament to how marketing, timing, and moral panic could amplify a film's notoriety. When it was finally remade in 2004, the new version pushed boundaries even further, but by then, the original's legacy as a banned classic was already cemented. The title had become shorthand for a specific era's fears about what horror cinema could depict. Number 15, Deep River Savages, 1972. Umberto Lenzi's film, also known as Man from Deep River, holds a unique place in exploitation history as the first entry in Italy's notorious cannibal genre. Before Cannibal Holocaust became infamous, before the subgenre spiraled into increasingly extreme territory, this relatively modest film established the template that others would follow to far more controversial ends. The story follows a British photographer captured by a Thai tribe and forced to assimilate into their culture. Lenzi filmed in actual jungle locations, lending the production an authenticity that blurred the line between drama and documentary. This would become a hallmark of the Italian cannibal films, presenting fiction as if it were anthropological observation. Real animals were harmed on camera, a practice Lenzi justified as adding realism to the jungle setting. This decision would haunt the film's distribution for decades and set a disturbing precedent for the genre. Multiple countries banned Deep River Savages specifically for this content, with censors drawing a clear line at real animal suffering regardless of the film's other elements. The film influenced an entire wave of Italian jungle horror throughout the 1970s and early 80s. Cannibal Holocaust, Make Them Die Slowly, and numerous other entries borrowed Lenzi's formula. Outsider enters jungle, encounters hostile tribe, extreme content follows. Deep River Savages was relatively tame compared to what came after, but it opened the door. By later standards, the film seems almost restrained, yet its legacy is undeniable. Every controversial cannibal film that followed owes its existence to this pioneer. Lenzi had created a blueprint, and other filmmakers would push it to limits he never imagined. Number 14. Thriller, A Cruel Picture, 1973. Though Arnvi Benius's Swedish revenge film, also known as They Call Her One Eye, occupies a unique space in exploitation cinema banned as obscenity, yet celebrated as an influence on mainstream filmmakers. The film's journey from underground cult item to acknowledged inspiration for Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill demonstrates how context and time can reshape a film's reputation. Christina Lindberg stars as Frigg, a mute woman who endures a harrowing ordeal before embarking on methodical revenge. The film's most notorious element is the eye injury scene, filmed using an actual corpse specimen obtained from a Swedish morgue. This detail alone ensured the film's infamy, as censors worldwide struggled with the ethical implications of using real human remains for dramatic effect. Some theatrical versions included unsimulated adult content, creating legal complications that varied by jurisdiction. The hardcore inserts made the film illegal in many countries regardless of its revenge narrative. While the violence alone was enough to ban it in others, distributors released multiple versions, each tailored to different markets and legal restrictions. Lindberg performed her own dangerous driving stunts and fired real weapons on camera, adding authenticity that elevated the film beyond typical exploitation fare. Her cold, determined performance as a woman, transformed into an instrument of vengeance, resonated with audiences who managed to see the film despite its suppression. Tarantino's public acknowledgement of the film as inspiration for Elle Driver's character in Kill Bill brought renewed attention decades later. The eye patch, the icy demeanor, the systematic revenge, all borrowed directly from Thriller. What was once banned as obscene had become recognized as influential cinema, though many countries still restrict or censor it today. Number 13. The Witch Who Came from the Sea, 1976. Matt Cimber's psychological horror represents one of the more tragic casualties of the video nasty panic, a film with genuine artistic intent caught in a moral crusade that made no distinction between exploitation and serious filmmaking. The Witch Who Came from the Sea wasn't designed to titillate or shock for profit. It was a deeply uncomfortable exploration of childhood trauma and its devastating long-term effects. Millie Perkins delivers a haunting performance as a woman whose repressed memories of abuse surface through violent fantasies and increasingly disturbed behavior. She targets men who resemble her abuser, and the film depicts her actions in unflinching detail. The violence isn't stylized or glamorized, it's presented as the tragic outcome of unprocessed trauma. UK censors in 1984 saw only the violence. The film was immediately added to the video nasty list and banned outright. Context didn't matter, intent didn't matter. The British Video Recordings Act made no allowance for psychological complexity or artistic merit. A film exploring the devastating cycle of abuse was treated identically to pure exploitation. The ban lasted 22 years. From 1984 to 2006, The Witch Who Came from the Sea was illegal to own or distribute in the UK. During those decades, serious film critics and psychologists who wanted to analyze its portrayal of trauma couldn't access it. The ban prevented the very discussions the film was designed to provoke. Other countries heavily censored the film, focusing on the graphic revenge sequences while ignoring the psychological framework that gave them meaning. Today, The Witch Who Came from the Sea is slowly being re-evaluated as one of the few video nasties that genuinely deserved better. It remains a cautionary tale about censorship that fails to distinguish between exploitation and exploration. Number 12. Blood Feast, 1963. Herschel Gordon Lewis accomplished something unprecedented with Blood Feast. He invented an entire genre that didn't exist before. Prior to 1963, explicit gore simply wasn't part of cinema. Horror films suggested violence, implied brutality, cut away at the crucial moment. Lewis looked at those conventions and decided to obliterate them. The plot is almost irrelevant. An Egyptian caterer targets women for ritualistic purposes, and Lewis uses the threadbare story as an excuse to showcase what he really cared about: gore effects filmed in vivid Technicolor close-ups. The violence isn't realistic by modern standards, but in 1963, audiences had never seen anything like it. Blood, organs, dismemberment, all presented in bright, saturated color. Lewis created the film for one purpose: to demonstrate that color gore effects could draw audiences. He was right. Shot in Miami for just $24,500, Blood Feast earned over $4 million in theatrical release. The return on investment was staggering, and it proved a market existed for content that traditional studios wouldn't touch. Police departments across America issued warnings before the film even opened in their cities. Some jurisdictions banned it preemptively, refusing to allow screenings based solely on reputation and marketing materials. Dozens of countries banned the film outright, and those that allowed release often demanded heavy censorship. The film's crude effects and minimal plot didn't matter. What mattered was the line Lewis had crossed, showing explicitly what had always been hidden. Every splatter film, every torture sequence, every gore-focused horror movie made since 1963 exists because Herschel Gordon Lewis decided that audiences wanted to see what had always been kept off screen. He was right, and cinema would never be the same. Number 11. Bloodsucking Freaks, 1976. Joel M. Reed's film, originally titled The Incredible Torture Show, represents exploitation cinema at its most indefensible. There's no artistic merit to argue for, no social commentary to extract, no redemptive qualities to highlight. Bloodsucking Freaks exists purely to depict women subjected to extreme violence in the guise of theatrical entertainment, and it makes no apologies for this. The premise places audiences in an uncomfortable position from the start. The film is set in an off-Broadway theater, where a demented showman stages acts of violence for paying crowds who believe they're watching elaborate special effects. The line between performance and reality dissolves, and the film revels in this ambiguity. Extreme acts are depicted in extended sequences that go far beyond what most exploitation films attempted. Reed's camera lingers on suffering with a persistence that transforms shock into endurance test. The film was marketed as dark comedy, but it plays as straight sadistic exploitation with no humor to soften the impact. Protests erupted at theaters across America. Several U.S. cities banned the film preemptively after women's groups organized demonstrations. The U.K. banned it outright, as did Australia and multiple other countries. Distributors who managed to screen it faced picket lines and threats of prosecution. Lloyd Kaufman and Troma Entertainment later rescued the film from obscurity, giving it new life in the home video era. This second wave of attention only reinforced its reputation as one of the most misogynistic films ever produced. No amount of cult appreciation or midnight movie nostalgia can erase what Bloodsucking Freaks actually is, a film that offers no defense for its existence beyond the fact that it was made and somehow released. Number 10. Nightmares in a Damaged Brain, 1981. Romano Scavallini's film achieved something rare in exploitation cinema. It was so convincing that authorities questioned whether they were watching fiction or evidence of real violence. Released under the simpler title Nightmare, the film's low-budget documentary aesthetic made its extreme content feel disturbingly authentic. The centerpiece involves a family targeted in an extended violent sequence filmed with brutal realism. The effects work was so convincing that investigators initially suspected legendary makeup artist Tom Savini had created them. Savini hadn't worked on the film at all, but the quality of the violence seemed to demand his level of expertise. UK authorities took unprecedented action. In 1984, police seized prints of the film and prosecuted the distributor for obscenity. This wasn't a simple ban, it was a criminal case. The prosecution argued that the film's realistic violence crossed legal boundaries, potentially depicting actual harm rather than staged effects. The distributor faced potential jail time. Courts examined the film frame by frame, questioning whether the violence shown could have been achieved without causing real injury to the actors. The film's ultra-low budget and raw shooting style worked against it. Polished Hollywood productions looked fake enough to be clearly fictional, but Nightmares looked disturbingly real. The distributor was eventually acquitted, but the film remained banned in the UK for decades. Other countries heavily censored or prohibited it entirely. The case set a troubling precedent. A film could be prosecuted not just for what it showed, but for how convincingly it showed it. Nightmares in a Damaged Brain blurred the line between reality and fiction so effectively that legal systems couldn't tell the difference, and that made it genuinely dangerous in ways its creators never intended. Number 9. Make Them Die Slowly, 1981. Umberto Lenzi's Cannibal film, also known as Cannibal Ferox, took the audacious step of marketing itself with the tagline "Banned in 31 countries" printed directly on the poster. The remarkable thing was that the claim was accurate. Lenzi had created something so controversial that nearly a third of the world's nations refused to allow its distribution. The plot follows journalists searching the Amazon for a missing brother, only to encounter a hostile tribe. What unfolds is a barrage of extreme content that pushes beyond what even other cannibal films had attempted. Real animals were harmed on camera in graphic sequences, and the human violence depicted included some of the most extreme bodily harm shown in mainstream exploitation cinema. Lenzi defended his approach by claiming to show authentic tribal practices. This was completely false. The film had no anthropological accuracy whatsoever. It was pure exploitation, wearing a thin disguise of documentary realism. Critics and anthropologists condemned the film for perpetuating racist stereotypes about indigenous peoples, while using real animal suffering for entertainment. UK authorities seized the film in 1984 and prosecuted it as obscene under new video legislation. Make Them Die Slowly remained banned longer than almost any other video nasty, with the prohibition lasting well into the 2000s. Australia, Norway, Finland, Iceland, and dozens of other countries implemented similar bans. The film's real animal content ensures it remains controversial regardless of changing attitudes toward human violence. Lenzi never apologized for the decisions made during production. The 31-country ban became a perverse badge of honor in exploitation circles, but it also represents a film that crossed lines even the underground community struggled to defend. Make Them Die Slowly stands as a monument to excess that many wish had never been built. Number 8. Cannibal Holocaust, 1980. Ruggero Deodato's film holds the dubious distinction of being the most infamous banned film ever made. Its notoriety isn't just legend or marketing hype. Cannibal Holocaust sparked genuine criminal investigations, forced its director to prove his actors were alive, and remains banned or restricted in countries worldwide more than 4 decades after its release. The film follows a rescue team searching for a documentary crew that disappeared in the Amazon. What they discover is footage showing the crew's final days. Deodato pioneered the found footage style that would later spawn the Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity, but his version included content that made the format genuinely dangerous. Real animals were harmed on camera in sequences that remain genuinely unwatchable. These weren't suggested or implied, they were filmed in graphic, unflinching detail. The turtle scene in particular has become notorious as one of the most disturbing moments ever put on film, not because of special effects, but because it was real. The human violence proved equally problematic. An impalement scene was so realistic that Italian police became convinced they were watching actual footage of a woman's death. Deodato was arrested and charged with murder. The film's cast had signed contracts agreeing not to appear in any other media for 1 year to maintain the illusion that they had truly died in the Amazon. Deodato had to bring his actors onto Italian television to prove they were alive. Even after the murder charges were dropped, he still faced obscenity charges and animal cruelty prosecution. The trial became international news, and the film was confiscated in over 50 countries. The found footage style made everything feel documentary real. Audiences and authorities alike struggled to separate fiction from reality. Many bans remain in effect today, not because of changing moral standards, but because the real animal deaths make the film legally indefensible regardless of its influence on horror cinema. Cannibal Holocaust created an entire genre of found footage horror, but the cost was unconscionable. It remains the most searched banned film on the internet, a testament to morbid curiosity that Deodato both created and can never escape. Number 7. Snuff, 1976. The power of marketing has rarely been demonstrated as effectively or as dangerously as with Snuff. Michael and Roberta Findlay directed a low-budget exploitation film in Argentina in 1971 titled Slaughter. It was unremarkable, destined for obscurity. Then distributor Alan Shackleton got involved and transformed it into something that sparked nationwide panic. Shackleton added a new ending in 1975. The fake finale showed what appeared to be a film crew turning on an actress after cameras supposedly stopped, with violence depicted in crude but convincing fashion. The film's ultra-low production quality became an asset. The cheap, grainy footage made the staged violence look more authentic than polished Hollywood effects ever could. Then came the marketing campaign. Shackleton claimed the final scene showed real violence, that an actress had actually been harmed during production. The claim was completely false, but in 1976, audiences had no way to verify the truth. The marketing materials promised something forbidden, something genuinely dangerous. People believed it. Women's groups organized massive protests outside theaters. They picketed screenings, distributed wanted posters for the filmmakers, and demanded police intervention. They genuinely believed they were witnessing evidence of an actual incident. The moral outrage was real, the fear was real, and the calls for prosecution were real, all based on a lie. Authorities investigated. The situation had escalated beyond typical controversy. If Shackleton's claims were true, the film was evidence of a serious incident, and everyone involved in its distribution could face criminal charges. Eventually, investigators determined the violence was staged, but the damage was done. The film launched a moral panic about underground markets that persists to this day. Despite decades of investigation by law enforcement, journalists, and researchers, no evidence has ever emerged that commercial distribution of genuine material exists. Yet the legend Snuff created refuses to die. The film was banned or seized in multiple countries, and some cities in the United States temporarily prohibited it. Snuff proved that sometimes the most effective horror isn't what you show, it's what you convince people they're seeing. The film itself is crude and unconvincing when viewed objectively, but context and marketing transformed it into something that terrified an entire culture. Number 6. Faces of Death, 1978. John Alan Schwartz directed Faces of Death under the pseudonym Conan Lesalaire, and in doing so created one of the most ethically problematic films in exploitation history. The film claimed to be a documentary compilation of real death footage, executions, accidents, medical procedures, animal incidents. Some of it was real, some of it was elaborately staged. The film deliberately made it impossible for viewers to tell which was which. The genuine footage included newsreel executions, slaughterhouse operations, and actual autopsy procedures. Schwartz obtained this material from various sources and edited it together with a clinical narration that presented everything as documentary fact. The real content was disturbing enough, but it was the staged material that created the film's lasting controversy. Other scenes were meticulously faked but filmed documentary style. A restaurant scene, an alleged accident, sequences presented as authentic that were actually performed by actors with makeup effects. The film's genius and its fundamental dishonesty was making staged and real footage indistinguishable. Viewers left theaters genuinely unsure what they had witnessed. The marketing claimed the film was banned in over 40 countries, which became true through a self-fulfilling prophecy. Once the claims spread, countries actually did ban it. The film became a legend in video stores throughout the 1980s, earning over $35 million and spawning multiple sequels that included increasingly real content as found footage became more available. The ethical nightmare is obvious. Real deaths were exploited for entertainment value. Grieving families discovered footage of their loved ones' final moments packaged and sold for profit. Staged deaths were presented as real, traumatizing viewers who believed they were witnessing actual suffering. The line between education and exploitation was obliterated entirely. 46 countries banned Faces of Death at various points, though legal status varies by version and jurisdiction. Some nations allow the clearly staged sequences while prohibiting versions containing real death footage. Others ban it entirely. The film remains legally ambiguous in many places. Caught between documentary and exploitation, education and trauma, Faces of Death endures as a cultural touchstone, referenced, imitated, but fundamentally indefensible. It proved that audiences would pay to see death, real or staged, and that distinction mattered less than the marketing suggested it did. Number 5. Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS, 1975. Don Edmonds's film represents exploitation cinema at its most controversial, using the Holocaust as the backdrop for graphic violence and degradation. Set in a Nazi medical camp, the film follows Ilsa, a sadistic commandant obsessed with proving women can endure more pain than men through brutal experiments on prisoners. Diane Thorne's portrayal of Ilsa became iconic in exploitation circles, a dominatrix in jackboots and tight uniforms, wielding sexuality as both weapon and armor. The character spawned 3 sequels and countless imitators, cementing Ilsa as one of grindhouse cinema's most recognizable figures. But the character's popularity couldn't obscure what the film actually depicted. Real Nazi experiments were recreated in graphic detail: pressure tests, freezing experiments, endurance trials, all shown with unflinching brutality. The film didn't suggest or imply these horrors, it staged them explicitly, presenting medical atrocities as entertainment. The fact that these experiments actually occurred in history made their exploitation for shock value even more disturbing. Adding to the surreal nature of the production, the film was shot on leftover sets from the television comedy Hogan's Heroes. The same barracks where sitcom prisoners had cracked jokes now served as the location for graphic depictions of camp violence. The tonal disconnect was jarring and somehow made the exploitation feel even more transgressive. Germany banned the film immediately and completely. The country's strict laws regarding Nazi imagery meant Ilsa could never be legally distributed there. Norway and Iceland implemented similar bans. Other countries demanded heavy censorship, cutting the most explicit medical sequences while allowing the basic narrative to remain. The debate around Ilsa has never been resolved. Some defend it as satire of fascism, arguing the film's over-the-top excess functions as commentary on totalitarian power and gender dynamics. Most critics condemn it as indefensible exploitation of real historical atrocities for profit and titillation. What's undeniable is that Ilsa, she-wolf of the SS, used humanity's darkest chapter as the setting for exploitation entertainment. Whether that makes it transgressive art or simply exploitation remains one of the genre's most contentious questions. Number 4. Salò, or the 120 Days of Sodom, 1975. Pier Paolo Pasolini's final film carries a darkness that extends beyond anything shown on screen. Based on the Marquis de Sade's most extreme novel, Salò depicts 4 fascist libertines who kidnap 18 teenagers and subject them to systematic degradation and violence. The film shows extreme content presented with cold, formal precision. Pasolini structured it in circles like Dante's Inferno, each section escalating in depravity. The clinical presentation makes it more disturbing than if it were filmed exploitatively. There's no music, no narrative relief, just methodical documentation of cruelty. Pasolini intended it as an anti-fascist allegory, a metaphor for how fascism dehumanizes and destroys. Most viewers saw only the extreme content itself, unable to look past what was shown to consider why. 3 weeks before the premiere on November 2, 1975, Pasolini was beaten to death. His body was found severely injured, then run over repeatedly. The circumstances remain disputed. Conspiracy theories persist about whether his death was connected to the film's content or his politics. Italian authorities immediately seized the film and prosecuted it for obscenity. Multiple countries banned it, with many prohibitions lasting decades. Even today, some jurisdictions censor or ban Salò entirely. The film's legacy is inseparable from Pasolini's murder. You cannot watch Salò without knowing the director was killed before seeing it released. That knowledge transforms every frame into a final statement from an artist who knew he was courting danger. Whether it's brilliant allegory or extreme content masquerading as art is a debate that will never be resolved. Number 3. Men Behind the Sun, 1988. T.F. Ma's Hong Kong film occupies uniquely troubling territory. It depicts real historical atrocities committed by Japanese Unit 731 during World War II, frostbite experiments, procedures without anesthesia, pressure chamber tests, biological weapons testing. These events actually occurred. The film claims to be historical education, yet it crosses lines that make that defense deeply problematic. The most controversial element isn't staged, it's real. A medical scene uses actual human remains obtained from a Chinese medical school. The director defended this as honoring history, arguing it emphasized the reality of Unit 731's crimes. Animals were also harmed on camera, justified as historical accuracy and educational value. The frostbite experiments are depicted in graphic detail. Whether all effects were artificial remains disputed. That uncertainty itself becomes part of the horror. Viewers cannot be certain what's staged, and that ambiguity feels intentional. Moose positioned the film as essential education about Japanese war crimes that had been suppressed. Unit 731's atrocities were real, extensively documented, and deliberately hidden by authorities after the war. Australia banned it until the 1990s. Other countries heavily censored or refused release entirely. The fundamental question remains unanswered. Does historical importance justify using real death imagery? Can you honor victims by showing their suffering in entertainment context? Men Behind the Sun exists in the uncomfortable space between education and exploitation, and perhaps that's exactly where it was always meant to be. Number 2. Aftermath, 1994. Nacho Cerdà's 30-minute Spanish short film strips away every element that provides distance between viewer and content. No plot, no dialogue, no music. Just a morgue worker performing procedures, then violating every professional boundary in ways that cannot be described here. The silence is oppressive, only ambient sound and tools. The camera never looks away, never cuts for relief. 30 minutes becomes an eternity with no narrative justification, no context. The worker takes a specimen home in a jar. That's the ending. Cerdà researched actual medical procedures and recreated them with hyper-realistic effects. The clinical approach makes it more disturbing than if it were filmed exploitatively. This isn't gore for entertainment, it's gore as routine process. Multiple countries banned it outright. Others created legal gray areas, legal to own in some places, illegal to distribute in others. The film's short length and lack of commercial release made enforcement inconsistent. Aftermath offers no defense for its existence. It's not commentary, not satire, not allegory. Some argue that's the point. forcing viewers to confront forbidden curiosity without comfortable narrative distance. It remains one of the most difficult films to watch because it's relentless, silent, and utterly devoid of any element that might make it bearable. Number 1. Guinea Pig, Flower of Flesh and Blood, 1985. Eiji Hino's Japanese film represents the absolute extreme of realistic violence in cinema, not the most brutal content ever filmed, the most convincing simulation. The film was so realistic it sparked an FBI investigation after actor Charlie Sheen became convinced he'd witnessed a real incident. The film has no plot. A woman is sedated by a man in samurai costume, and 42 minutes of systematic harm follows in surgical detail. Manga artist Hino created effects so convincing they became genuinely dangerous. In 1991, Charlie Sheen watched it at a party and immediately contacted authorities. The FBI launched an investigation and contacted Japanese police, who verified all participants were alive and unharmed. The fact that trained investigators took it seriously demonstrates how effectively it blurred reality and fiction. The film contains no music, minimal cuts, no relief presented as continuous real-time footage. It was deliberately marketed with ambiguity about authenticity, feeding into the mystique and horror. Norway, Germany, and Finland banned it outright. Other countries created legal gray areas. The film's status remains ambiguous because authorities struggle to classify something that looks real but isn't. The fundamental question Guinea Pig raises has never been answered. Should something this realistic exist even as fiction? Does technical achievement justify showing content this extreme? The film has no entertainment value. It's purely an endurance test. Guinea Pig remains the most realistic depiction of extreme violence ever filmed. That distinction ensures its notoriety will never fade, even as the debate about whether it should exist continues without resolution. 20 films that tested the absolute limits of what could be shown on screen. Some pushed boundaries in the name of art, others for pure shock value, and a few crossed lines that perhaps should never have been crossed. Which one shocked you most? Are there films that should remain banned, or does all cinema deserve to exist? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you're fascinated by the darker corners of film history, subscribe for more. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.